everyone, welcome to Flavour Fridays. My name is Emma. I'm a chef tutor here at the School of Wok, and today I'm making sweet and sour ribs. So for the marinade of our pork ribs, we've got a few different ingredients here, and many of them you are already familiar with or maybe already have in your pantry. So we've got some finely chopped garlic and ginger. We've got some hoisin. We've got some honey. We've got some light soy sauce, dark soy sauce, a bit of sesame oil, and some Shaoxing rice wine. Now, it's called sweet and sour ribs because of the sourness that comes from the star ingredient, black rice vinegar. Now, black rice vinegar has a much earthier flavor than white vinegar or cider vinegar. If you can seek it out, I would highly recommend it. You can use it in dishes like this. You could use it as a dipping sauce for dumplings or as a substitute for any other type of vinegar. So, key star ingredient, black rice vinegar. And then the sweetness comes from the hoisin and the honey. Now, growing up, I always had either oven roasted spare ribs or pork cheek. And my dad always picked pork cheek because it's a part of the animal that doesn't move very much. So it's really fatty, it's really tender. And we always basted it with honey. So we'll baste chicken wings with honey when we have summer barbecues, the pork cheek, basically anything that you want really sweet and sticky to go into the oven, we baste it with honey. So in a mixing bowl, I'm just going to mix all of these ingredients together. So now that I've mixed all of these ingredients together, I'm going to pour it all over the ribs. Now, the ribs that we have today are some really nice a whole pork rib rack. Now, I got this by having a nice chat with the lady behind the butcher. I wasn't happy with the spare options that they have on the shelf, and so I asked for a large rack of ribs just like this. When you roast a rack of ribs whole, it gets really, really juicy and you get all the fat from the edges of the ribs. Now this is called sweet and sour ribs, but as you can see, it doesn't look like that bright orange color that you instantly think about when you hear someone say sweet and sour. We have the sweet and sour flavor profile in a lot of Chinese food. So with half of the marinade, you want to marinate your ribs, minimum 30 minutes, but you can even do overnight to get maximum flavor. And then with the other half of the marinade, we're going to reduce it so it becomes a really nice thick glaze, and then we'll baste the ribs while they're cooking so it gets really nice and sticky. So I'm going to pop some gloves on because it might get a little bit messy. And I'll pour the marinade all over the ribs. I'm just marinating it on the oven rack, on the oven tray that I'm using to pop into the oven, just so it's a bit easier. So half of the marinade goes in now. So pour the marinade over, give it all a really nice rub, get it into all of those nooks and crannies. I'm going to cover it with some aluminum foil and then just let it marinate, get really nice and tender, and chill out on the side of the kitchen counter for, again, minimum 30 minutes. So with the remaining marinade, I'm just going to pour it into a medium saucepan like this, bring it up to medium-high heat, and just let it reduce until it gets really nice and thick and sticky. So now that we've been cooking the leftover marinade on a medium heat for around 5 minutes, we want it to reach this really nice syrupy consistency. Something that looks like this, like the consistency of maple syrup. You don't want it to be too thick because it will continue to cook when you put it back into the oven. So with this reduced marinade, I'll just set that aside. So now that my ribs have marinated, I'm going to pop them into a preheated oven at 160 degrees Celsius. They're going to roast with the foil on for about 45 minutes up to an hour. When you roast it with the foil on, it keeps them really nice and moist and tender. And then I'll take the foil off, baste it with this marinade that I've cooked down, and turn the heat up to maybe 200 degrees Celsius so it gets really nice and charred on top. So now that the ribs are in the oven, I can prep some garnishes to serve my ribs. So I've got some spring onions here. Now, a nice little trick with the spring onions to create a really beautiful garnish is if you remove the end bits, if you slice them into long strands, so I've just sliced them into maybe 3-centimeter pieces, I gather them all together, and then I slice the spring onions lengthwise, so along the grain of the spring onion, to get really nice long strands. So with these long strands of spring onion, if you pop it into a small bowl of cold water, the spring onion will seize and turn into these really beautiful spring onion coils. You'll always find this on top of steamed seafood dishes back home in Hong Kong, and on top of any dishes really. It's very impressive, and you can always have this prepped ahead of time. So with the chilies, I'll just do long, thin pieces. And then with the coriander, I'll just do a very rough chop. Now, these ribs are a really nice dish to prep for a big dinner party. You can do the first step of the roasting at a low temperature for as long as you want till they get really tender. And just before the guests arrive, you can turn the heat up, bring it up to 200 degrees, even higher, to get a really nice char. So you can have that just ready in the oven, ready to go, so that you don't have to be messing around in the kitchen while your friends are all arriving. So, roughly chopped coriander, set that aside, and there are my garnishes. So the ribs have been in the oven on a low heat for slightly over an hour. I'm going to take them out, check on them, give them a baste with the marinade that we've reduced down, and then I'll stick it back into the oven at 200 degrees Celsius. So I've just uncovered it, and because it was cooking on a low heat with the foil on, we're not getting any of those char marks. The first step of the cooking is to get the meat really nice and tender and juicy. So with some of the cooking liquid that came out of the meat, I'm going to tip the tray and then pour that juice back onto the ribs, so basting it in its own meat juices. So if you don't want to stick these ribs in an oven, you can also buy a much smaller piece and do and make the ribs in a wok. So you'll make the same marinade, you'll put all of the marinade into the wok with the ribs and let that slowly cook away. You might want to top it up with a bit of water because it'll cook a lot quicker than in my oven with a low heat. So now that I have basted it in its own juices, I'm going to put the glaze all over the top of the ribs. This is what is going to make it really nice and sticky and delicious. This is definitely a more westernized way to cook your ribs. Not all Chinese kitchens have an oven. Most of us just have a wok. But if you have an oven, then it gets really nice and crispy on top, which is something that you wouldn't quite get in a wok. So now that we have basted our ribs in that marinade, I'm going to stick it back into the oven, but this time the oven is at 200 degrees Celsius, so the highest setting, so it gets really nice and crispy and charred on top. So the ribs have been under a 200 degrees Celsius oven for around half an hour, just until they're really nice, sticky and charred on top. So I'll go ahead, take them out and plate up. All right, so I'm going to slice this up and plate up. So you see how this meat is just falling off of the bone. I'll do some individual pieces and then I'll do some bigger pieces as well so that everyone can dig in. Oh, wow. Here you go. A nice platter of ribs. I'm going to garnish straight onto the platter and then I'll serve it right on this chopping board as well. So here are the garnishes that I chopped up earlier. I'm going to do some coriander right over the top. I'll do some spring onions. So you can see how it's coiled up into these beautiful curls now. That looks absolutely beautiful. Put that right on top. And then I'll garnish it with some chilies as well right on top. And there you go, your sweet and sour ribs. I'm just gonna cut a piece off and then I'm gonna give it a try. It is piping hot. I'll probably burn my fingers and the roof of my mouth. Oh, it's so hot. Growing up, I had a dish like this so often that every single week my mom and I would complain about, pork again, oven roasted pork again. But nowadays, I long for those dinner times when my dad would bring the roasted spare ribs or pork cheek to the table. What is the dish that you ate so much as a child and got so sick of it but would love to eat right now? Leave it in the comments below. No, it was really good though.
I love you.
So like, comment, and subscribe.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on our videos, and I'll see you next time on Flavour Fridays.